Without much thought to the science, one might conclude that first cousins share 50% of their DNA because they share a pair of grandparents, but due to having two sets of chromosomes and recombination, cousins share roughly 12.5% of their DNA. The amount of DNA shared between siblings, aunts and uncles, grandparents, grandchildren, and more distant relatives will vary. In other words, you may share more or less than 50% of your DNA with a sibling and more or less than 25% of your DNA with a grandparent. The amount of DNA shared with parents, children, and of course an identical twin is consistent. Males inherit slightly less DNA from their fathers than from their mothers because the Y chromosome contains significantly less DNA than the X chromosome. Personally, I would not recommend marrying anyone sharing more than 5% of your DNA. I would consider a second cousin marriage fine, especially in a desperate situation. If you are concerned about pathogenic mutations, genetic tests is available. Having a well-made pedigree does a great service. I think researching your own family history will help you strive to do better and will give you a greater respect for your ancestors and history broadly. I know where my ancestors are from, and a few years ago, I took a DNA test from 23andMe. It updated once, and it became less accurate based on what I knew. I do not recommend getting a DNA test unless you're trying to connect with relatives. If you're curious about your haplogroups, your Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA, then you should get a test specifically for that. 23andMe guessed perfectly that I'm 7/8 Northwestern European and 1/8 Southern European. It guessed decently about the breakdown by country, and in some instances, it did horrible at guessing the specific locations like cities. For example, 23andMe guessed that my Norwegian ancestors were from Oslo, the capital of Norway, but none of my ancestors came from Oslo. I can't really blame 23andMe for this, though. Distant relatives moved to bigger cities, and 23andMe tested them and tagged their DNA as from being from those cities. I think 23andMe should start focusing on the family tree function more, which would do me well. I made a map of all the places I traced my ancestors to a while back. It's not very useful because it doesn't show how much ancestry from each place I have. I traced 12.5% of my ancestry to Sicily and less than 1% to Sweden. I trace most of my ancestors to Switzerland and England. Ethnically, I'm Celtic and Germanic, with trace amounts of Near Eastern and possibly Slavic. A father passes his Y chromosome down to his sons, and a mother passes her mitochondrial DNA to all of her children. The Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA do not undergo recombination, so they remain relatively stable from generation to generation. Small, usually single base pair mutations, occur and accumulate over time, and can be traced well. Haplogroups are created through these mutations. I trace my paternal ancestry to Ireland, but that's as specific as I can get. My paternal haplogroup is I2A1, which is uncommon in Western Europe and is most common in the Balkans and in Sardinia. My paternal haplogroup is more specifically A8462, which is almost exclusively found in the British Isles. I trace my maternal ancestry to West Pomeranian Voivodeship, Poland. My maternal haplogroup is V12, which is predominantly found in Germany. West Pomeranian Voivodeship used to be a part of Germany, and to my knowledge, my maternal-most third great-grandparents, William Frederick Schwartz and Wilhelmine Johanna Drahim, were ethnically German. William F. Schwartz's paternal haplogroup was M417. M417 and its progenitor R1A are predominantly found in Eastern Europe among Slavic peoples. Traits are typically either dominant or recessive. Your phenotype is the traits you express, and your genotype is what you have in your genome. Dominant traits are expressed over recessive. Take blood type. A and B blood type are dominant to O, and positive is dominant to negative. My phenotype is B negative, and my genotype is BO negative negative. If you have a single recessive pathogenic gene mutation, then you are a carrier. I carry beta thalassemia, the most common disorder in the world. It's a blood disorder. I inherited it from my dad's mom's dad. Polygenic traits are controlled by multiple genes. Polygenic traits include height, skin color, eye color, and hair color. In the case of polygenic traits, there is much more variability, but the chance an outlier is selected is much lower. That's why siblings all have different heights, but they're usually closer in height than, say, another group of siblings. A little off topic, but it's also worth noting that simply having a Y chromosome gives you about an extra 5 inches. You can roughly estimate final height this way. My mom is 65 inches tall, and add 5, you get 70. Add my dad's height to that, which is 64 inches, you get 134. Divide that by 2, and you get 67. Get this? I'm 67 inches tall. I'm 5'7".